The air inside the packed federal courtroom was thick with tension. Reporters lined the gallery, their fingers poised over keyboards ready to capture every word. This wasn't just any trial, it was a case that could expose deep-rooted corruption in the American judicial system. At the heart of it all stood Pam Bondi, the sharp and fearless U.S. Attorney General, a woman known for her unwavering commitment to justice. Today, she wasn't just another high-ranking official. She was the prosecutor in a case that had the nation holding its breath. Her opponent? Judge Leonard Whitaker, a federal judge with a long career, now facing accusations of bribery, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy with powerful business tycoons. For years, whispers about Whitaker's corrupt dealings had circulated, but nothing had ever stuck. He was seen as untouchable, protected by the very system he was supposed to serve. That changed when an anonymous whistleblower leaked damning evidence, emails, phone call recordings, and financial transactions exposing Whitaker's backroom deals. Bondi had been personally selected by President Donald Trump to lead the case. He had given her a simple directive. Expose the truth. Let justice be served. Now, she stood tall at the prosecution's table, her piercing blue eyes scanning the room. Across from her, Judge Whitaker sat in the defendant's chair, his once imposing presence reduced to a nervous shell. His lawyers whispered frantically, but it was clear the weight of evidence against him was crushing. Bondi cleared her throat and addressed the court. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you will witness firsthand how corruption festers in the highest levels of our judicial system. Judge Leonard Whitaker took an oath to uphold the law. Instead, he chose to break it. She let the words sink in before continuing. He manipulated trials. He let criminals walk free for the right price. He obstructed investigations. And worst of all, he thought he was above the law. The judge overseeing the trial, Judge Samuel Hartman, nodded for Bondi to continue. Unlike Whitaker, Hartman was a man known for his integrity. Bondi clicked a remote and a large screen displayed a series of incriminating bank transactions. The courtroom murmured as the numbers flashed, millions of dollars transferred to offshore accounts linked directly to Whitaker. Then came the real bombshell, a recorded phone call between Whitaker and a notorious Wall Street executive, Robert Langston. The jury listened in stunned silence as Whitaker's voice played over the speakers. The DA wants to push for the maximum sentence, but I can make that problem disappear for the right price. Langston's response was chilling. Name it. Bondi turned back to the jury. Judge Whitaker didn't just betray his oath. He sold justice to the highest bidder. Whitaker's face turned red. His lawyer, a high-powered defense attorney, jumped to his feet. Objection. This recording is taken out of context. Judge Hartman raised a hand, silencing him. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Bondi. Bondi smiled slightly. She wasn't finished yet. The most damning evidence was yet to come. The tension in the courtroom escalated as Pam Bondi walked back to the prosecution's table, flipping through a thick file of documents. The evidence so far had been damning, but she knew that the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Judge Leonard Whitaker sat stiffly in his chair, his face a mask of forced composure, but Bondi could see the sweat beading on his forehead. His defense attorney, Malcolm Greer, was shifting uncomfortably in his seat. They both knew they were running out of lifelines. Your Honor, Bondi said, addressing Judge Hartman, I would like to call our key witness to the stand. The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open and a middle-aged man in a dark suit walked in. He looked nervous but determined. Please state your name for the record, Bondi said as he took his seat at the witness stand. Jonathan Hale, he replied, his voice slightly shaky. The room stirred. Hale had been Whitaker's court clerk for over a decade, a man who had witnessed every decision, every case, every behind-the-scenes deal. Mr. Hale, Bondi continued, can you tell the jury what you saw while working under Judge Whitaker? Hale took a deep breath. Yes. I was ordered to destroy case files. I witnessed money being exchanged between Judge Whitaker and defense attorneys representing high-profile criminals. He told me it was just how the system worked. Bondi leaned in. Are you saying Judge Whitaker actively manipulated case outcomes in exchange for money? Hale swallowed hard. Yes. The courtroom erupted into a flurry of gasps. Some reporters started furiously typing on their laptops while others whispered among themselves. Whitaker's lawyer immediately stood. Objection. Hearsay. Judge Hartman held up a hand. Overruled. The witness will continue. Bondi nodded and flipped a page in her folder. Mr. Hale, I want you to tell this court about the case of United States versus Jackson. A murmur swept through the crowd. That case had been one of the most controversial in recent history. Billionaire real estate mogul Michael Jackson III had been accused of embezzling over $500 million, but despite overwhelming evidence, he had walked free. Hale clenched his fists. Judge Whitaker instructed me to alter court transcripts. He changed the jury selection process to favor those who had personal ties to Jackson's legal team. And he personally received a $3 million deposit from Jackson's offshore account just 2 weeks before the trial began. Another wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Bondi pressed further. Do you have proof? Hale hesitated, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a USB drive and held it up. This contains copies of the altered transcripts, the original unedited files, and bank statements linking Judge Whitaker to the bribes. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Whitaker, who had sat quietly up to this point, suddenly slammed a fist on the table. This is a goddamn circus. I won't sit here and be framed, he bellowed, his face turning crimson. Judge Hartman pounded his gavel. Order in the court. Bondi didn't even flinch. She turned to the jury, her voice unwavering. This is what corruption looks like. A man who believes himself above the law, caught red-handed and still trying to deny it. But today, justice will not be bought. Whitaker's lawyer frantically whispered something in his client's ear, but the judge shook his head. His mask of confidence was crumbling. He knew this was spiraling out of control. Bondi stepped back and addressed the judge. Your Honor, I move that this evidence be officially entered into the record and that the jury take it into consideration as we move toward a verdict. Judge Hartman nodded, his expression serious. So ordered. Bondi allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. The walls were closing in on Judge Whitaker. And soon, they would cave in completely. The weight of Jonathan Hale's testimony sent an unmistakable ripple of panic through Judge Whitaker's defense team. His lawyer, Malcolm Greer, was desperately flipping through legal codes and documents, searching for something, anything that could counteract the damning evidence Bondi had just introduced. Pam Bondi, standing tall and composed, knew this was the beginning of the end for Whitaker. She had built an airtight case, and now the whole courtroom could see the cracks forming in the once powerful judge's armor. Judge Hartman turned to Greer. Defense, do you wish to cross-examine the witness? Greer stood, tugging at his tie. Yes, Your Honor. He strode toward the witness stand, his expression forced into a mask of confidence. Mr. Hale, you claim that Judge Whitaker personally instructed you to alter court transcripts. Why should we believe you? Do you have any proof that he gave you direct orders? Hale didn't hesitate. He pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from his jacket pocket and held it up. This is my personal record of everything that happened in Judge Whitaker's chambers. Dates, times, conversations. Every instance where I was told to tamper with records or dispose of files. Bondi's lips curled into a smirk as she watched Greer's expression darken with alarm. And Hale added, some of those conversations were recorded. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Greer's hand tightened into a fist. Recorded. Bondi, sensing his unease, stood up smoothly. Let's not waste time, Mr. Greer. The prosecution would like to submit these recordings as evidence. These are audio files of Judge Whitaker discussing the destruction of key court documents, along with conversations regarding financial transactions. Greer's jaw tightened. Objection, Your Honor. We don't know the authenticity of these recordings. Judge Hartman sighed, clearly unimpressed. Ms. Bondi, do you have a means to verify the authenticity? Bondi nodded. Yes, Your Honor. These recordings were analyzed by forensic audio specialists. Their report confirms there is no tampering, no alterations. These are genuine recordings of Judge Whitaker's voice. Judge Hartman took the file Bondi handed him and skimmed through it. Finally, he looked up at the defense table. Objection overruled. The evidence stands. A low murmur spread across the room. Bondi took a breath, feeling the shift in momentum. She turned to the jury. You have now heard firsthand how Judge Whitaker operated. He altered trials. He destroyed records. He accepted bribes. He placed criminals above justice. And he did it all while sitting in the very chair meant to uphold the law. Across the room, Whitaker's once arrogant expression had morphed into barely concealed panic. Then something unexpected happened. Judge Whitaker suddenly stood up. The room gasped. His lawyer tried to pull him back down, but the disgraced judge yanked his arm away. This is ridiculous, he roared, pointing a trembling finger at Bondi. You think you can do this to me? I know how this system works. I am the system. Bondi simply folded her arms and tilted her head. Not anymore. Judge Hartman banged his gavel furiously. Judge Whitaker, you are out of order. Sit down immediately or I will hold you in contempt of court. Whitaker's breathing was heavy, erratic. He looked around the courtroom, his eyes darting between the jury, the reporters, and the spectators as if realizing this was it. His reign of untouchable power was over. He slumped back into his seat, rubbing his temples as his lawyer frantically whispered damage control strategies. But it was useless. Pam Bondi turned back to the jury, her voice calm and steady. Justice is not for sale. And today we prove that no man is above the law. The trial was almost over. But the most dramatic moment was yet to come. The weight of the trial pressed on everyone in the courtroom. The air was so thick with tension that it felt like a storm was about to break. Pam Bondi had done her job. The evidence was laid bare: audio recordings, financial documents, witness testimonies, each piece exposing Judge Leonard Whitaker for what he truly was: a fraud, a criminal, a man who had twisted the law to serve his own greed. The jury, seated in solemn silence, exchanged glances. They had heard everything. The recordings of Whitaker selling verdicts to the highest bidder, the bank statements showing millions funneling into offshore accounts, the testimony of Jonathan Hale, his own clerk, detailing how the judge had rigged trials for corrupt billionaires. The courtroom sat in anticipation as Judge Hartman turned to the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man with graying hair, stood and nodded. "We have, Your Honor." Whitaker sat up straighter, his expression tight. His lawyer's hands were clasped so hard they were turning white. Bondi, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. She had been fighting corruption for years. She knew what justice looked like. "In the case of the United States versus Judge Leonard Whitaker," the foreman began, his voice unwavering, "on the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. But the foreman wasn't finished. "On the charge of bribery, we find the defendant guilty." Whitaker's face was turning red. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be untouchable. The foreman looked at the final charge, the one that could seal Whitaker's fate completely. "On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States government, we find the defendant." He paused for a second, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. "Guilty." The courtroom exploded in murmurs. Reporters scrambled to send out breaking news updates. A sitting federal judge had just been convicted of corruption. Whitaker's hands trembled. His breathing was fast and erratic. His lawyer leaned over and whispered furiously, but Whitaker wasn't listening. He was staring straight ahead, his mind seemingly lost in the reality that his time was up. Judge Hartman's voice rang through the courtroom, cutting through the noise. "Order! Order in the court!" He turned to Whitaker. "Leonard Whitaker, you have been found guilty on all charges. Given the nature of your crimes, the damage you have done to the integrity of our justice system, and the overwhelming evidence against you, I hereby sentence you to." He paused, looking directly at Whitaker. 25 years in federal prison, effective immediately. Chaos erupted. A loud gasp filled the room. The journalists were already typing furiously. Spectators whispered in shock. Whitaker's once powerful legacy had crumbled right before everyone's eyes. Pam Bondi, however, wasn't looking at the crowd. She was watching Whitaker. The former judge was shaking his head, his lips moving in silent disbelief. Then suddenly, bang! The doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 U.S. Marshals marched inside, their badges gleaming, their expressions unreadable. Whitaker's eyes widened. "No! No! This isn't happening!" One of the marshals spoke firmly. "Leonard Whitaker, stand up." Whitaker's lawyer tried to object, but the marshals ignored him. They grabbed Whitaker's arms and hauled him to his feet. The entire courtroom watched in stunned silence as they snapped handcuffs around the disgraced judge's wrists. Click! Whitaker flinched at the sound. He had sentenced countless men in his courtroom before. He had watched criminals be taken away in cuffs. But now he was the one being let out like a common felon. As the marshals led him past the prosecution table, he turned to Bondi, his face twisted in desperation. "You don't understand," he hissed. "There are people bigger than me. I was just doing what they told me to do." Bondi tilted her head slightly. "Then maybe you should start talking," she said calmly. "Because they won't be able to save you now." Whitaker opened his mouth, but before he could say another word, the marshals pulled him forward, escorting him out the doors. The moment they were gone, the courtroom exploded into motion. Cameras flashed. Reporters hurried out to deliver the shocking news. And in the midst of the chaos, Pam Bondi took a deep breath. Justice had been served. But she knew this was just the beginning. The courtroom slowly emptied as reporters rushed outside, eager to be the first to break the story that a sitting federal judge had just been convicted and taken away in handcuffs. The news would dominate headlines for weeks. Pam Bondi remained seated at the prosecution table, flipping through her notes, though her mind was elsewhere. Justice had been served, but something about Whitaker's last words lingered in her mind. There are people bigger than me. I was just doing what they told me to do. Bondi wasn't naive. She knew that corruption at this level never stopped with just one man. A sudden voice pulled her from her thoughts. Ms. Bondi, do you have a moment? She looked up to see Agent Daniel Cross of the FBI, a tall, no-nonsense man who had been instrumental in gathering evidence for the case. Bondi nodded. What's on your mind? Cross took a seat next to her and placed a thick file on the table. Whitaker wasn't lying. Our wiretaps suggest he was just one piece of a much larger network. Corrupt businessmen, politicians, even a few sitting judges. He exhaled sharply. It's bigger than we thought. Bondi tapped her fingers on the table. How big? Cross flipped the file open, revealing a list of names. Powerful names. Big enough that Whitaker's conviction might just be the opening act. Bondi's sharp eyes scanned the list. Then we go after all of them, she said simply. Cross gave a small smile. I figured you'd say that. Bondi leaned back in her chair, feeling a familiar fire burning inside her. This trial had been a victory, but the war against corruption was far from over. Somewhere in a cold, dimly lit holding cell, Leonard Whitaker sat alone. His empire had crumbled, and now his only way out was to name names. Pam Bondi had set her sights on the real masterminds behind the corruption. And this time, there would be nowhere for them to hide. The fight had only just begun.